Okay, let's try and get our heads around this. Imagine a place, right, where food is just so incredibly scarce that people are literally swarming aid trucks, just grabbing anything they can before it vanishes. It sounds like something from a movie, but it's not. It's the reality for 500,000 people right now in Gaza, a place formerly declared gripped by famine by the UN. That was August 22nd, 2025. So today we're doing a deep dive into this. We want to cut through the noise, really understand the roots of this crisis, which are very much man-made, grasp the human toll, and look at the huge global challenges complicating the response.
Yeah, and what's so critical to understand right from the start is, like you said, this isn't a hurricane or an earthquake. This famine, it's a crisis created by conflict. It's been made much, much worse by the deliberate cutting off of vital lifelines. So we'll look at how things got this bad, the systems that are failing, and what this means really for all of us, not just in Gaza. It's a story about what happens when aid is blocked and the world, well, struggles to react effectively.
Let's really paint the picture then. Gaza has over 2.1 million people, and now 500,000 are facing acute malnutrition. Starvation, basically. The desperation is just hard to imagine. Carl Scow, he's the chief operating officer at the World Food Program. He was in New Delhi recently, August 26th, and he described people literally pulling food off WFP trucks as they arrive.
Right.
Just sheer hunger driving them.
It's a terrifying image, survival mode.
Absolutely. And despite maybe a small increase lately, the current average, maybe 100 aid trucks a day, he called it a mere drop in the ocean.
A drop in the ocean.
To give you some perspective, earlier in 2025, there was that brief 42-day ceasefire. During that time, 600 to 700 trucks were getting in daily, and even that wasn't really enough after nearly 2 years of conflict.
Right, which brings us to the term itself, famine. What does that actually mean technically? The Integrated Food Security Phase classification, the IPC, they're the global authority on this stuff. They have a very specific and, frankly, catastrophic definition.
Okay, so what are the criteria?
Well, you need at least 20% of households facing extreme food shortages, like almost nothing to eat. Then over 30% of children under 5 have to be suffering from acute malnutrition wasting, basically. And tragically, the death rate. At least 2 people out of every 10,000 dying daily from starvation or related diseases.
2 out of 10,000 daily.
Daily. In Gaza City and the surrounding areas, they've met these thresholds. The IPC confirmed it. And the projections are just awful. They suggest 641,000 people could be in these famine conditions by the end of September 2025 if things don't change dramatically.
And in that kind of chaos, you always worry about the most vulnerable, don't you? Women, children, the elderly, people already sick. How does aid even reach them? I mean, when distributions are just swarms of desperate people, are the usual systems for targeting aid just gone?
That's a really critical point because, yes, in a full-blown famine situation like this, the standard protocols often break down completely. Normally, you'd try to have targeted distributions, clinics, specific points for families with young children. But when you have mass desperation, chaotic scenes at truck drop-offs, those organized systems are overwhelmed. It becomes almost impossible. So the people who need it most might actually be the least likely to fight their way to the front. It's a failure of the whole safety net, not just a lack of food.
And that desperation, that chaos, it didn't just happen randomly. As you said, this famine is fundamentally man-made.
Absolutely. When you pull back and look at the bigger picture, it's undeniable. This isn't nature. It's rooted in the conflict that escalated nearly 2 years ago now. The UN, various aid agencies, they've been very clear. Restrictions on aid are a primary cause. Since March 2025, there was a severe blockade on food and essentials.
A blockade, so aid couldn't get in.
Right. And the truly maddening part, warehouses in Jordan and Egypt were apparently overflowing with aid, ready to go. Food, medicine, sitting there, while just miles away people were starving. It shows you the problem wasn't a lack of aid existing, it was access, politics, blocking aid.
Which is just infuriating to think about. But then, even when that blockade was partially lifted in late May 2025, things didn't exactly get fixed, did they? A new problem came up.
No, exactly. A whole new system was introduced, relying on private contractors, mainly this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, instead of using the established UN coordination, which has experience, networks.
And that shift, it's been incredibly problematic from what we're hearing. The old UN system had, hundreds of local distribution points, places people could actually reach. This new system has just a handful, and they're often in dangerous, militarized zones.
Right, so people face an impossible choice.
We've heard these heartbreaking stories, Palestinians having to walk for miles through areas with active fighting, risking gunfire, just to try and get aid. Gaza's health ministry says over 600 people have been killed just trying to access these aid hubs. killed trying to get food.
It's horrifying.
Yeah.
And it really highlights the danger of sidelining established, neutral humanitarian channels. It doesn't just slow things down, it politicizes aid and puts lives at even greater risk.
Yeah.
That's why Tom Fletcher, the UN humanitarian chief, he called it a moral indictment of humanity's failure. He wasn't exaggerating. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said something similar, didn't he, on August 22nd?
He did. He called it a reality unfolding before our eyes, and he pleaded for a ceasefire, hostage release, and crucially, unrestricted humanitarian access.
Unfettered access, that's the key.
Now, we do need to be clear here. Israel's government disputes these findings. COGAT, the Israeli agency involved, says the IPC findings are biased, based on incomplete data, some maybe even from Hamas, they claim. Prime Minister Netanyahu has insisted, quote, no starvation in Gaza, and says Israel's facilitated 2 million tons of aid since the war began.
Right, and that figure, 2 million tons, it gets cited. But the aid agencies on the ground, they push back hard. They say, okay, maybe some aid enters the territory, but it doesn't reach the people who need it. Because of the ongoing fighting, the logistical chaos we talked about, the lack of safe passage, even direct attacks on aid convoys.
Yeah.
So there's this huge disconnect between aid delivered and aid received.
And behind these arguments and statistics, there are just devastating human stories. Like Allah Haddad, 29 years old in Gaza City, told reporters he often goes days without eating, survives on tiny rations, rice, lentils, bread, said he hasn't eaten fruit in 8 months. Just imagine.
8 months.
Or the story of Yazan Abu Fel, just 2 years old. His severe malnutrition was essentially a death sentence. These aren't isolated cases. We know 147 people, 88 of them children, have died from malnutrition since the war started in 2023. And in just one 24-hour period in late July 2025, 14 deaths from malnutrition were recorded. 14.
It's unbearable. And it's not just the lack of food calories, it's the total collapse of everything else. Gaza's healthcare system, shattered. Water and sanitation, overwhelmed, broken. Clean water is a luxury now. Local farming, which used to provide a lot of food, wiped out by the conflict.
So another lifeline gone?
Exactly. So you see households reporting severe hunger doubling between May and July 2025. Places like Gaza City, Khan Yunis, the Rarbala, they're way past those famine thresholds now. And when you have no clean water, no sanitation, no healthcare, malnutrition becomes lethal much faster. Even simple illnesses kill.
It's a nightmare scenario. And even Gaza's small religious minorities aren't safe. We heard from the Latin Patriarchate, only about 645 Catholic and Orthodox Christians are left, including priests and nuns who've bravely stayed to offer care, but even they aren't immune. An Israeli airstrike in July hit the Holy Family Church, killed 3 people, wounded 10, including the priest. Shows the danger is everywhere for everyone.
A horrific reminder of the indiscriminate nature of it all.
So zooming out again, this disaster in Gaza, it's not happening in a vacuum, is it? It's part of a bigger, really worrying global trend?
No, not at all. It's part of a frightening global surge in hunger. We're looking at 320 million people worldwide now considered acutely food insecure. That number has nearly tripled in just 5 years. Tripled.
Wow. And where else are we seeing major crises?
Well, look at Sudan. It's grappling with its own massive catastrophe. 25 million people facing acute hunger there. Carl Scow from the WFP again, he said 10 million in Sudan are in the starvation phase. 10 areas already declared famine zones. People are saying it's the largest hunger crisis since Ethiopia in the 1980s.
The scale is just immense.
It is. And then there's South Sudan, also right on the brink, particularly the Upper Nile state. Aid agencies are having to use helicopters, airdrops, incredibly expensive ways to deliver aid just because the infrastructure isn't there or it's too dangerous overland. Scowl basically called it the #1 crisis for staggering needs versus available resources, especially as WFP funding dropped 40% last year.
40% drop in funding just when needs are skyrocketing.
Precisely. And that funding issue connects to global politics, doesn't it? When U.S. President Donald Trump came into office in 2025, his administration slashed foreign aid budgets. That hit global humanitarian efforts hard, right when they were needed most. And on top of conflict and funding cuts, you've got extreme weather, climate change fueling that, and economic shocks, trade issues. It's a perfect storm. Aid groups are stretched unbelievably thin.
So the world is responding, but it sounds like it's patchy, maybe not enough.
Fragmented and insufficient, I think that's fair to say. Israel introduced that 10-hour daily military pause in parts of Gaza back on July 28th, supposedly for aid convoys. But UN officials like Tom Fletcher basically said thanks. But no thanks, 120 trucks on one day. It's a fraction of what's needed. It doesn't fix the fundamental access problem.
And the airdrops we hear about, Spain, Jordan, the UAE doing them?
They're symbolic, maybe helpful in tiny ways, but largely ineffective for a crisis this size. Often the aid lands in the wrong place, or desperate crowds overwhelm the drop zone, leading to chaos, injuries even. Even Spanish officials admitted airdrops are not what we want. They know land access is the only real solution.
So are we seeing any more, maybe political pressure building?
We are starting to see some signs, yes. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer, late July, he threatened to recognize the Palestinian state unless Israel took real steps on the humanitarian crisis. That's potentially significant. The Netherlands, their PM Dick Schoof, announced support for suspending Israel's access to the EU's Horizon research funding. Hinted at trade measures, too. Germany's Chancellor Merz pledged German airdrops from Jordan, calling it a small but important signal. So diplomatic and economic levers are being considered, at least.
And the U.S., always a key player. What's the stance there?
It's been mixed signals, frankly. President Trump did acknowledge real starvation in Gaza late July, promised to set up food centers, though details were very thin. But at the same time, as we mentioned, his administration's cuts to overall foreign aid have really hurt humanitarian operations worldwide. Agencies like Mercy Corps have been critical, calling the Gaza famine entirely preventable and unconscionable. So there's this tension acknowledging the problem, but maybe weakening the tools to fix it.
So after all this, the big question is, can this be turned around? Is it too late?
Look, the IPC, the UN agencies, they are adamant. This famine is reversible. But, and it's a huge but, only with immediate, massive, and sustained action. It requires a permanent ceasefire. It requires the release of hostages. And it requires absolutely unrestricted humanitarian access. Those aren't negotiable points. The IPC report on August 22nd put it bluntly, the time for debate and hesitation is past. Starvation is spreading fast. Without a huge aid surge, the death toll will keep climbing steeply.
So it's about will, then. The WFP calling for a completely different level of assistance. It's a plea for genuine action, not just token gestures.
Exactly. The resources exist, the food is there in warehouses, the logistical know-how is there. What's missing seems to be the collective political will to prioritize saving lives over everything else. When you hear the stories, Al-Haddad going without fruit for 8 months, little Yazan Abu Fail dying, they force, remember, these aren't just statistics. They're real people in unimaginable suffering.
Yeah. Our deep dive today really pulls back the curtain on just a horrifying situation. A brutal reminder of what happens when conflict, politics, and maybe global indifference just collide. With 500,000 people already in famine, the world faces this profound moral test, doesn't it? To act, and act now.
It really does. And this crisis in Gaza, along with Sudan, South Sudan, it hammers home a truth we maybe don't want to face. Hunger, famine, on this scale, it isn't inevitable. It's not like bad weather we can't control. It's a consequence of human decisions, human actions or inaction, which leaves us all, especially you listening, with a really hard question. Knowing all this, what specific actions do we need to demand from our leaders, from international bodies? How do we ensure accountability and actually get the aid flowing? Because this is a test of our shared humanity, and frankly, it's one we cannot afford to fail.